Our next speaker is Claudia Juech, is the program director, program development lead rather, for the government innovation portfolio at Bloomberg Philanthropies. Claudia has more than 15 years of experience leading programs and operations in the international philanthropic sector. Claudia, please take to the platform. You can start sharing your slides if you are sharing, or please go ahead and speak to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction, which makes me blush. Thank you so much. Very, very kind. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time. I want to share a few examples that really illustrate the power of data, sharing from my experience, not only at Bloomberg Philanthropies, but also from my prior work at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation and the Claudia Foundation, which focused on the use of data and AI for social impact. So I've been in the data space for about 6-7 years now. So in 2018, when Ra Shetty, an American economist, published his research that was called The Zip Code as a Destiny, which basically said that the neighborhood where you are born determines your economic status until you die. So if you are born poor, you will die poor. That research attracted a lot of attention, and it was the first time that that kind of data was really seen, kind of taken together. It didn't necessarily tell Americans something new about upward mobility, but it really drove the point home that kind of birth and your neighborhood determine your economic status later in life. A city in North Carolina, Charlotte, really took that research and looked at it and realized that there are really neighborhoods within their cities, as their city, that had been left behind. And they decided to take on a generational endeavor to address those inequalities. And so they created different corridors across the city where the problem was the greatest, and decided they want to work on affordable housing, kind of community safety, workforce, and other types of economic development, and have been at that since. What does this example illustrate? I think it illustrates for me two things. One is that data today can really provide us with new insights, and that can rally new actors and really provoke and catalyze new areas of work. That is one. I think the second one is when you think about, so the research came out in 2018, it triggered Charleston to take on a long-term vision, a multi-generational vision, 2040. The data, in a way, is part of the glue that holds that together. It's the kind of the monitoring whether the city is still moving in the right direction, but it's also something that connects the many different projects that are underway to address that goal and the different stakeholders. So that is one example how data can really be transformative. A couple of other examples that illustrate different points. One project that I worked on was with the Invisible Institute in Chicago, and they were trying to address police harassment that was specifically affecting Black and brown women, trans women. What happened was that in police reports, often there was a crime that was reported, but the additional harassment that happens through the police didn't come out in those reports. And so what the Invisible Institute decided was that they wanted to look at kind of large numbers of PDF documents and kind of surface those cases, but to describe those documents and provide the kind of the meta information, they worked with volunteers on the south side of Chicago who really suffered those cases of harassment. And they worked with those women and had them index and create the training data set for those cases. So I think there are two aspects to that. One is this nonprofit organization that was resource constrained, so used volunteers to kind of help them get their work on the road. But on the other hand side, they also really created the trust of the community in that data. They tapped the community and involved them in indexing and cleaning, preparing the data for the analysis, which I think is a great way of kind of creating the trust for when the data then has been analyzed. Another example brings us to Honduras in South America. And there an organization worked with second-tier cities in Honduras and organizations that represented informal settlements to understand where are the areas in those cities that are most likely to be affected by flooding, landslides, mudslides, and other areas. So the idea was really to identify those vulnerable areas and vulnerable populations that are often low-income populations and marginalized populations, and to better allocate resources to those areas. I think why this is an interesting example is, again, it's about trust. It's about how can you work with a community of informal settlements that are sometimes not even represented on the maps, the official maps of those cities. And so they found a way to really work with representatives of those settlements to ground truth what they were finding in the data, and then really making the connections across the city to also facilitate action based on the data. Another example takes us to Assam, a state in India, where Open Contracting Partnership, another nonprofit organization, was looking at fiscal, geospatial, demographic data to basically identify to what extent vulnerable locations were really receiving infrastructure funding and relief goods that they needed. So again, a question of inequality. There, I think it's about really making use of open data, but also gaining access to data from the state in this particular case, to really take kind of a broad view and having the ability to combine a lot of different data sets. But the reason why this example or this project has been successful and it kind of has moved forward is really based on the relationships that this nonprofit built with the state government of Assam. So that it really became a collaborative effort over about 5 years. So it shows you really the long time that is often needed to kind of build that trust, build those cross collaborations for data to be effective and to trigger action. Another example is in Bogota, another city in South America, and it touches on aspects of financial inclusion. I think it's something that I've also seen often in many parts of Africa, that informal vendors don't have access to credit, don't have access to kind of formal banking, and how do you determine the credit worthiness of these people? I think what's somewhat unique about this example is that Bogota as a city recognized that it could do more for economic development by supporting these vendors, and provided and used utility data together with other types of data to basically establish an alternative credit score. And so it led to really a significant number, multiple thousands of vendors gaining access to credit accounts that they didn't have before. in Mexico, in a state in Mexico, there's a project that is called Visor Urbano. And what is interesting about that example is that one city developed a software tool that allowed citizens direct access to permitting processes. So the goal there was to basically cut out the middleman, have kind of an easier and more simplified permitting process. But as a result, it also reduced corruption that was associated with that process. And there, I think what's interesting about that example is that now that software is used by close to 100 cities in Mexico. So it's really an example for a replication of an idea that worked in a very similar context, where legal and regulatory environments were the same, and where this idea could really be kind of exported and brought to other cities. And another example from Mexico that I find quite interesting is the example of Mexico City itself, where the mayor, when she became the mayor of Mexico City, decided she wanted to achieve digital autonomy, not necessarily as a goal of its own, but as something that she believed would address inequities in her city. And she created an innovation agency that was also responsible for the digital transformation of Mexico City. So today, to my understanding, this agency has hired 40 developers. They develop their own tools. They manage the data from Mexico City, and they are relying on less on vendors, but much more on kind of their own tools that they have been developing. They have also created access points for the citizens of Mexico City that provide free internet, so that the citizens and the residents can access digital government services, which has really sped up access to those services, but also has increased the availability to a lot more people than previously. So all of these examples really show a couple of things. They show that data is an important ingredient, and I think allows us more and more to really move things forward. But there are a lot of other elements that are needed. The trust by the community, the kind of the cross collaboration with many other actors, questions around who's taking action on the data. So those are all, I think, questions that need to be answered. One approach that I have found useful in my work in terms of engaging a community around a data project is really to use the data life cycle. So when you think about kind of elements of the data life cycle, only to take a few, you have data collection and data cleaning, you have kind of the design of what the data project should achieve and what it would look like. You have obviously analysis and visualization and the sharing of data, and a couple of other kind of process steps depending on which life cycle you are utilizing. But I think thinking about, who needs to be involved at what step, what are the risks for equitable use of data, and how can you mitigate them, and really using that cycle to go through it, and then engage different stakeholders using that, I think is one potential way to kind of stabilize and kind of solidify community engagement around data projects. Because I think that is and I'm sure it's on all of our minds. I think I heard last week we had the former Secretary of Transportation speak at an event. And transportation is one of those sectors where often you have a lot of data, and a lot of cities see them as as a first kind of sector where they want to experiment and implement data projects. But what the former Secretary of Transportation, Anthony Fox, was saying was, it's about the people. It's not about the data. It's about, kind of what people want and need, and what people will support. And I think that is very important to remember, that data is truly only a means to an end. One other aspect that I've also found critical in my work is, and that I think is what we are moving towards, but what I would like to see more of, when I think back about a decade ago, we were excited about data sets becoming available, data sets being built, and that is in many areas still important and still critical, and we still have a dearth of information and data in many areas. But I feel that we have also moved forward and are not only looking where's data available and then looking at that data as a potential, gold mine and thinking about how that can be utilized, but really starting the other way around. What is the problem that we can solve using data? There's an example that is not relevant, as relevant for an African context, but in Scottsdale, Arizona, the city decided they kind of wanted to increase their data capabilities, and they worked with an organization called Public Digital. And what Public Digital did first, for a long time, didn't really have to do anything with data per se. It was really about bringing different community members together and identifying what are critical problems that are on their minds. In the case of Scottsdale, Arizona, that was about kind of Airbnbs and how they affect house prices and rent prices in their neighborhoods. But I think it's less about the concrete example in this case, but really more about the process, how they had kind of different research approaches, were trying to understand and define what the problem was, and then looking for, had identified a couple of potential candidates for a problem, and then we're really looking at what are the data sets that are available that could be utilized against that problem or to make progress on that problem. And they kind of, and so they brought a set of different data sets together that then kind of shed more light on that challenge. But I think it's that is one of the approaches that we are increasingly seeing, where it is really about what is the problem, can data help solve an aspect or make progress on an aspect of it, and then bringing the different data sets together, really data on purpose, data as a service is also how this organization called it, to really make progress on that. And so I think that's what I would like to leave you with, is that data is powerful. Data is powerful if you really engage people, identify the right problem, and then I think you have already a lot of the ingredients to potentially make progress on it. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Claudia, for that very informative input that you made, really highlighting the importance of data and reminding us that it's really not about the data itself, but about the people and solving the problem through data, whatever problems that might face people, and using data to really address those. We're going to take maybe 1 or 2 questions before we drop off. We know that we have a hard stop at 7 a.m. your time. Thank you so much for making us the first thing, maybe, hopefully, on your diary for today. joining us all the way from New York at 6 a.m. Thank you so much, Claudia. If there are any questions for Claudia, we'll take just maybe one or two, and then we will wrap up for lunch and take our sessions forward after lunch. Are there any questions? I see one hand coming up. Siko, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one question for Claudia. In terms of data governance, how important do you think data governance is important in ensuring the veracity of the data, but also the independence of the data? I think with the advent of AI, we're beginning to see that data alone, without actually understanding the sources of the data or who is actually hosting the data, data alone is not or cannot be the only source of truth. So how do we ensure that data governance aspect or just the framework around data governance is something that is also embedded as we move towards data-centered or data-informed cities or cities that rely on data to inform their decisions? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, and thank you for raising an important aspect that I didn't touch on, but that definitely deserves mention. A critical aspect, no doubt about it. One example, one of the areas that I've kind of recently worked on that might be relevant for all of you here. If you work in cities, we have created a platform, a community platform that is open for city employees and that focuses on the use of generative AI, so ChatGPT, DALL-E, and other tools in cities. And these tools, I think, also again hold great promise, but they also bear risks because they are kind of more easily usable without coding experience, and so they can be used across cities by a broader set of people, and cities in different regions start experimenting with those tools. And so in kind of preparing and developing that platform, we spoke with a lot of chief data officers, chief information officers of cities. And so given that this is very early stage, the first thing that these cities have done, and given that this is, these are potentially tools that are not only used in the data unit or the innovation unit or the IT unit, but kind of more broadly across the city, the first thing that they did is they kind of created generative AI kind of policies and guidelines, and some of these are kind of also being made available on that platform. And so that is something that if you are kind of interested in these aspects and you work at a city, kind of that could be a potential source for you. I know that in the previous session, you also talked about peer learning. So this is basically kind of a peer learning community. I even know that kind of cities like London and a few others have started to create and employ someone in the role of AI ethicist, who's consulting departments across different cities on, I think, exactly the questions that you are raising. How do you then really apply those policies and guidelines to diverse data sets so that they are not leading to kind of the discrimination or just, kind of simply kind of neighborhoods and populations not being kind of recognized and paid attention to as they deserved.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Claudia. We are now going to really wrap up the session and go to lunch. Thank you so much for that, Claudia, and really providing excellent examples that have taken us across the globe, from Chicago to Honduras to India to Bogota, Colombia to Mexico City, and back to the United States, Scottsdale, Arizona. These examples have really shown, and what you've emphasized, that data is powerful when we engage people. Thank you so much for those inputs, and we are going to bid you farewell and enjoy the rest of your day. Claudia, thank you so much.